and welcome again to Minds Between Languages. This time we are delighted to have as our guest Professor Defeng Li, who will share with us his insights on translation, cognition, and directionality. Hello, Defeng. It's very good to see you.
Hello, good to see you too.
So you're an interesting person because much of your research seemed to focus on translator education, right? So you teach some classes, as I understand. You made a lot of research on education, and also you serve as the president of the World Interpreter and Translator Training Association. Where does your interest in translator and interpreter education come from?
Well, I did my master's in translation in China, actually in Nanjing Teachers University. And I went to do my PhD in Canada. That was in the early 90s, actually late 80s and early 90s. And I wanted to further my study by doing a doctorate in translation. However, as you know, probably today, like at that time, there was very, very few doctoral programs in translation studies worldwide. Actually, because at that time there was no internet, the only sort of reference I was able to gain in order to have access to the information about these colleges and universities around the world, particularly in the States or the UK, is a book called, I think it's called Pearson's Guide to American Universities and Colleges. So yeah, I was not able to find any program in doctoral program in translation studies. So I ended up in Faculty of Education, University of Alberta in Canada, where I studied second language education. I was actually quite dismayed at the beginning. I had to study in the Faculty of Education, which was not my first choice. But actually now, come to think of it, I think that was actually one of the really best things that have ever happened to me. As we all know, I think in the early 90s, translation studies was very much I don't know whether we were able to call it an independent discipline, probably just really trying to find its foot somewhere. But by studying in the Faculty of Education, I was very well trained in research methodology, particularly in data-based empirical research methods. I spent 3.5 years in the Faculty of Education, University of Alberta. And after I got my doctorate, I landed a job at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where I started teaching translation sort of professionally in the Department of Translation. In the first few years, I published in language education. For example, I published in TESOL Quarterly on language teaching methodologies. I published in journals like Teacher and Teacher Education. But then my head of department back at that time told me, saying that, okay, Defeng, you are now teaching the Department of Translation. Your research should probably need more on translation. So then the best sort of way to enter into translation or translation studies for me at that time would be combine my training in both translation and education. So that is why and how I started doing quite a bit of work in translation education research. And I think what I was able to bring into the research on translation education was, again, my training in data-based empirical research. So I conducted really a series of studies trying to see how our curriculum is preparing our students for the real job market. So in order to really find the answers to those questions, I conducted studies using questionnaire surveys, interviews, focus group, observation, and of course, plus documentary analysis. So I actually took a more like a mixed method approach to in my research on translation education. That's how I actually got started and in the big area of translation studies, but more specifically on translation education research.
And so you certainly have a very rich repertoire of different methods that you're using in your research. You mentioned that. And one of the more recent studies that you conducted is actually an fMRI study. Am I correct?
That's right. Yes.
So how do these techniques actually help you to investigate what is happening in our brains during translation interpreting?
Right. So the big study that we've been doing recently is using MRI to study language processing in general, but more specifically, sight interpreting and consecutive interpreting in particular. How I got sort of into the area of cognition or cognitive studies of translation from translator training, so I came across the work by our first generation of scholars in translation process research, Donald Caroli, Wolfgang Losche, Krins Honig, and then Rita Jeskalani, and later on, Professor Anne Jacobsen, Alvis Fabio, and then particularly the work by the PACT group headed by Professor Amparo Elbir. Right, so then I actually started to doing research in that area as well, using the more traditional or psycholinguistic approach that's the thinking out protocols, right? So, but I think that's useful because with the research I did, I was able to think better about what we teach to our translation students and how we teach our translation students. And then I came to the University of Macau in 2014 from the University of London, and we actually set up this Center for Studies of Translation, Interpreting, and Cognition. And here I was very happy to find colleagues at this university who were very, very interested in this area of research as well, like Professor Victoria Li, who was a top interpreter and who also conducts research on interpreting. So we actually we got together and we thought we have the best combination of expertise because she, as I said, she's a practicing interpreter and she is interested in interpreting research, and I have the sort of the background in translation process research and also particularly my training in database and empirical research methods. So we were able to join hands and then work together in this center. Because on this team, I have members from our Faculty of Science Technology, Faculty of Social Sciences, Faculty of Education, Health Sciences faculties. So we have a team of about 10 people. And then, of course, the university got us a MRI, and we thought we might as well take advantage of this advanced technology to help us understand the questions that we have in our mind.
Tell me.
Really, the first one is really to sort of understand more about translation interpreting. I believe that if we understand the more the how our brain works in translation interpreting, that'll put us in a better position to design curriculum for our and also methods for our students. Secondly, I think we have a unique perspective, particularly if you think about simultaneous interpreting. It's fascinating how the human brain works. You have both languages activated at the same time. You listen and you produce at the same time, which is very different from the work that's been done by many cognitive scientists. For example, I think they either work with a single language, or even if they do work with bilingualism, they are more into code switching rather than like a simultaneous activation of both languages. So I think we do have a unique perspective to offer in neuroscience or cognitive science. So that's why we also do the research as well. And also, third purpose is I always believe that if our research can offer something for the local community, that will be very, very useful. So with these sort of purposes in mind, the very first thing that we want to be able to answer with the advanced machine is the directionality issue in translation studies. I think up to this day, I think many of us still believe that we should probably only translate into our mother tongue. Some even say it's ethical to translate into your first language. However, the in actuality, especially in this part of the world, for example, in China, even in Japan, Korea, in the Asian context, we do translate both ways, right? Translate into and out of our mother tongue. So we wanted to see whether there's any real empirical evidence to show that we should only translate into our first language, right? So that's sort of how we got started in the project that we are doing. And then at the same time, I thought that sort of coincides with our interest in the other, we call it centennial debate in language or in language studies. That is like, although for many of us who are bilinguals or even multilinguals or who are doing translation interpreting, we sort of take it for granted that bilingualism is a good thing. Right? It's probably even cognitively advantageous. However, it's totally unsettled issue in the larger scientific or research community. As you know, like even in the year of 2019, Nature carried an article claiming that there's no evidence to show that the bilingualism is advantageous to to our cognitive development. So if you sort of go back a little bit, like in the 1920s, that was the first group of researchers who produced evidence to show that the bilingualism was sort of hampering the cognitive development of children. And then in the 50s and 60s, another group of researchers produced evidence to show that actually bilingualism is helpful and also facilitates cognitive development. And of course, ever since then, this debate has been going on for many, many years. Each group, each camp also produces, their own evidence. So we wanted to see whether we can have some really solid empirical evidence to help us resolve this debate by using the more advanced technology, like that is the fMRI that we have on campus. That's the question we want to understand. That is whether bilingualism is indeed helpful or not, and more specifically, relating more particular to us is whether really there's evidence to make the claim that we should only translate into our mother tongue.
It's very interesting. It's really fantastic. And before now you start telling me what you found, maybe first, how can I imagine this study? So there's this big fMRI. If I were to participate in your study, what could I expect?
Well, yeah, we divide our study into sort of three phases. The first phase, we call it mapping. The second phase is called interacting. And the third phase is called changing. So what we do in this study is that we work with three languages. Because, Macau is a multilingual and multi sort of cultural society. Chinese and Portuguese are the two official languages. And then English is the working or more professional language used in education, etc., etc. Yes.
And may I just ask, does it also mean that most people or maybe all people in Macau are actually bilinguals?
Many of them are bilingual. Actually, we in our study, because as I said, like the first part is called mapping. What we wanted to do is really to map the monolingual processing
Mhm.
and single mode processing in our brain. And we actually had the difficulty in finding true monolinguals these days.
Yeah, it
Because
makes it difficult. Yeah.
yeah, it's because of the spread of English, or it's very difficult to find monolinguals who really have no knowledge of English at all.
Where did you find
So,
them?
well, we were still able to find them. I remember because what there was one time I had some shoulder pains. So I had to went to see my Chinese medicine doctor, and they prescribed massage for me. So when I went to have the treatment, I actually talked to the ladies who helped me, because they were actually, in my mind, they were can be called true monolinguals. They had very little exposure to English, so I was
That's
able to,
fantastic.
I was able to encourage them to come and work for us.
So how was their
Yeah.
experience? That it's really fantastic also to how you talk about that and how your private life in a way also then helps you with your research. So they came to
How?
your lab and
Yeah,
was
yeah.
maybe the first
Some
time
of
for
them
them
did.
also that they participated in such a study?
Oh, that was absolutely the first time for them. I was able to mobilize them to come. Yeah, I told
Congratulations.
him. I said, "You just come. You probably never had a chance. Working with university professors in their experiments, and we are using a very advanced machine. We have the best machine in Macau because our MRI is what we call is a 3T MRI. But like the local hospitals, they only have a sort of 1T MRI. I said, just come and have your brain scanned, and you might able to, at least you get to know your brain much better. And if you happen to, if there's happen to be any problem, you can start, you get free scan and also get some information, can start treating immediately. So yeah, they were able to come, and they actually enjoyed it because I remember several of them came together on a Sunday. We have a very nice campus, very beautiful campus. So they come and work with us, and then they actually had picnics somewhere on campus. So they had a great time. Yeah,
You said the first phase was the mapping phase, but then you had
mapping.
two other phases, right?
Right. Right. So the first phase is mapping, because we want to map the brain like for monolingual processing and single mode. For example, reading, speaking, listening. That's sort of a single mode, right? And then we listening in English, speaking English, and reading English. Also, that's monolingual. So that's the first phase. We have all these brain images used as the baseline, and then we move on to the second phase. It's called interacting. Basically means cross-lingual, cross-modal processing. So you listen in English, and then memorize and then speak in Chinese. So that would be actually consecutive interpreting, right?
Yes.
Right. So listening in English, memorizing, and then speaking in Chinese. Or we can ask the subjects to read in Chinese and then speak in English. So that would be sight interpreting.
That's
So
where the cross-modal part comes in.
right, the cross-lingual and the cross-modal part, that's called interacting. And the third part we wanted to really is changing. We wanted to see the brain plasticity as a result of intensive interpreting and language training. So it's more like a longitudinal study. We got a group of students together, right? So far we work with our own students. We wanted to get groups of different groups, of course. But at this moment, we were able to get together our students and then give them interpreting training, intensive interpreting training, and then see how the functionality of the brain might change over a period of intensive training. So that's the third phase is called changing.
And now, what did you find?
The very
Right.
first thing we found so far is, I remember I made the same remark during our chat in San Diego. I said what we found was, if someone is up for promotion or assessment, don't do MRI study. It takes tons of time to really scan all these subjects, and then the processing of these images is painfully time consuming. So we have now, so far we got all, I think 70% of the sort of scanning target met, but the analysis of the images is probably, we just done the first 10-15% of the work.
Mhm.
So, but based on what we've done so far, particularly with particular reference to our question regarding directionality, for example, we found that like a language two tasks in general, they elicited stronger and longer and more extensive but delayed activations in the brain. But then when it comes to sight interpreting and consecutive interpreting, that is the multimodal tasks, um, they actually elicited much more complex activation patterns. What does that mean? That means that we do not have sort of clear evidence to argue for, say, translating into your mother tongue only. Because as we said, the patterns is much more complicated. We can, with the evidence we have so far, we actually can say that the directionality is probably not that important, but more, there are many more factors that can help us determine whether, someone should translate in both directions or in one direction only, that is translating into your own mother tongue, right?
So, can you say something about those factors that would play a role in directionality?
The Chinese case, for example.
Mhm.
Now, over the past 10 years, because of the development of the economy, many students were able to actually study for extensive periods of time in overseas, in English-speaking countries. So their English level has really increased a lot,
Mhm.
and to the level of almost native like English proficiency. And also, even if some students do not go out to study in foreign countries, with the internet, right, with the importation of many like English medium movies, their English level has grown tremendously.
Yeah, they have a
And
great
even,
exposure. Yeah.
yeah, there's great exposure. I don't know. Actually, the one thing that impressed me just like over the past week was I was very happily surprised to see many of our national athletes at the Olympic Games were able to attend press conferences in English. That was very surprising to me, actually.
Was
That
not the
was
case
not,
before?
no, that was totally not, because it's
Yeah.
almost unimaginable for our athletes to be able to really converse in English. So I was very surprised to find that. So from there, that's also a reflection of level of English, the nationwide in the younger generations. So I think English, I mean, they've got very good English. That's one thing. Of course, at the same time, the exposure to the English culture, right?
Yeah.
And then another thing that could affect the interpreting or translation is the knowledge preparation.
Mhm.
I mean, knowledge plays a big role, right? If you know your subject, you can do much better job,
Sure.
right? So, right. So it's because I think when we argue whether we should translate into our own language, we're mainly concerned about the language proficiency, and of course, your understanding of the culture. Because at the crux of that debate is whether which one is more cognitively costly, right? So from our research here, we don't have any clear evidence to show it's either more or less effortful to translate in any one of the directions.
I've also heard the argument that translating in your or interpreting in your B language might actually be
Hmm.
also less effortful because, I mean, you kind of reduce the comprehension effort because you understand your mother tongue better. I don't know, could you find something in your study that maybe relates to this idea or?
What we found in our study was when you translate from language 2 to language 1, the work was more effortful in the comprehension stage. And then we suspected that because of the effort that they had to spend on the comprehension stage, that actually affected their production in the whole process. So that was what we found. We also were able to have some methodological sort of findings because to be accurate, to call methodological breakthroughs. Because for example, one thing we were able to do is to use a mask to help us get rid of the noise in the scanning. Because
So
as
you
you know,
need to
like
explain that.
tra-
Which noise?
traditionally, MRI was particularly good at spatial resolution. And in that process, you lie in the MRI, right? You cannot move because when you move, you produce what we call noise. That is the all the activation like will be messed up, and that will make it very difficult for us to analyze the data later on. So basically, in order to do a good scanning, the subject should not move their muscles at all. Even like that is to say, you cannot speak because once you speak, you move your facial muscles.
That makes
Yeah,
consecutive interpreting quite challenging, huh?
that's right. So let me tell you, once you start to talk, your muscles move, and that's noise. That's going to interfere with the scanning. There was one study published a few years ago using MRI to study interpreting, but actually, what they do is they ask the subjects to think interpreting,
Yeah.
not really articulating anything, because once they start to articulate, that's noise, right? Or the other way to study interpreting before us was use a method which we call sparse interpreting. That is, they do speak up, but when we process the data, we sort of threw away the data once the person starts to utter anything. You see what I mean? So the study was actually still very much on the first part before any
Yeah.
production is made. Because once you start to speak, right, there's noise. We are not able to to analyze the data, to look into the data. So
So this is
what
the
we call
data
it,
you're
we just throw
discarding.
away that part, right? So it's not really a study of interpreting of the entire process. But what we did here in our study, we were able to using this technology, the technique we developed here, to really map out the entire process, including the listening, and the speaking, and we were actually able to record the output. So later on in our analysis, we were able to incorporate that into our study as well. So we are actually quite excited about that because we are able to map the entire process. And at the same time, we use another technique which is called surface-based scanning or imaging. Because traditionally in MRI studies, uh, people generally use volume-based imaging.
Hmm.
But volume-based imaging has many advantages, but also has one big disadvantage. That is related to the size of our heads, because our heads vary in terms of sizes, right? So if you use volume-based scanning, sometimes the identification of the particular area that's being activated is not so accurate because of the variation in terms of the size of the heads. But
Hmm.
when we use this new technique of surface-based imaging, we are able to look at the image of our activities more accurately. Basically, if your head is really large, we can sort of shrink it a little bit in proportion, right? And if it's too small, can expand it a little bit so that we can be looking at the same spot, right, across many subjects. So we believe that is also a breakthrough in our study.
Yeah.
And these are very useful because that comes to the sort of third purpose I mentioned to you in the beginning,
Yes.
because we hoped that our study can also contribute to the local community. We actually showed our study to our president of Neuroscience Association here in Macau, who is also head neurosurgeon in Macau. He
Hmm.
was actually, when he saw our study, he was surprised that this technique was available in the research but not available to them, because he said we need this technique to help us with our operations. Quite often they have to open the brain to treat tumors or to treat any lesion there. When they try to do the operation, they have to try very hard not to hurt the patient's, say, language functions or motor skills. But for now, they don't have a very easy and accurate way of determining that. He said your way of being able to provide both temporal and spatial resolution of the human brain will help us, determine where we cut, where we do not cut. And
Hmm.
we are actually very excited about this. So we are now actually in the middle of applying for a large grant from the government to help us further develop this technology to say make it available to the medical community so that our research can actually really help people with their health.
That's wonderful. It's
So
really fantastic.
yeah.
So that's really one of those goals, I mean, research goals that you have achieved.
Yes. So we are very happy about that too.
I can
And
imagine, yeah.
yeah, we also believe in open access even to research, because we in our project we built a University of Macau Brain Atlas. We call it UMBA. We want to make it accessible when it's ready to the general research community, like a translation studies community, and even the community of neuroscience and cognitive science. There are already, I think, two or three major important brain atlas around the world, but they are, I think, if I understand correct, they are mostly volume-based images. Ours is probably the first surface-based image atlas. We want to be able to make it available to really many more researchers so that they can make use of our research work here and be able to
Increase,
generate interesting findings.
yeah, to increase the accuracy also of their measurements. So maybe to
That's right.
wrap up this interview also, so one of your questions also was, does it make sense to teach interpreting or translation into the B language? Now, based on your findings so far, if I understood you correctly, you don't have any evidence to say it doesn't make sense. So does it also mean you would continue teaching interpreting and translation into the B language?
I think definitely we'll continue teaching interpreting and translation into B language because that's been going on here in this part of the world for as long as translations is being taught. I think
Yeah.
since we don't have any evidence to refute that, so I think we'll continue. And also, I think we do need interpreters or translators who work actually in both directions. For me, I don't teach interpreting course myself. I teach more translation. However, like as I think these days, because of the ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, I believe that we in our teaching of written translation, I think the focus is probably more on literary translation, not in the sense that literary translation will help our students find jobs, but I think it's really the skills, the creativity, or the transferable skills, the creativity that literary translation can help our students develop. If you ask me to describe our profession or even our world in 10 years or 15 years, I think the word for me would be uncertainties. We don't really know what's going to happen.
This is
What's going to
certainly right.
happen for our translation interpreting practice. So I think since we have so many uncertainties, the best way to prepare our students is to help them develop transferable skills, which involve like problem solving, teamwork, organization skills, time management, negotiation skills, etc., flexibility even, right? So I think, as I said, like recently I've been doing teaching a course which I call it teaching translation in black box theater, because we have a black box theater. Basically, what I do is I ask my students to make groups of two, and they translate only a text of literary or artistic nature. For example, if they translate a drama, they need to really stage their translation as well. They don't just translate, from text to text. So when they have produced the translation, they need to act it out. So it's in the process of acting out, they really develop their teamwork spirit, their problem solving abilities, their negotiation skills. Even have to borrow people to help them to finish a act of, say, Merchant of Venice, for example, right? So
Yeah.
it takes many more than two people to do the whole show. So I think that's something that I've been doing, and I really would like to see more of our colleagues to think about probably how to help our students develop their transferable skills to prepare them for the uncertain world ahead.
That's certainly right. Yeah. Translation as a
Yeah,
preparation for the world. In a sense.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Defeng. It was a wonderful interview with you. And yeah, wishing you
Thank
a good
you.
day.